They gave her to the knight as a joke, and Mira knew it the moment her name was called in the great hall. The laughter started before she even stepped forward, a ripple of cruel amusement that spread across the assembled nobles like wildfire. Through dry wheat, her bare feet made no sound on the cold stone as she walked between the rows of silk and velvet. Every eye in the hall watched her approach the throne, some with pity, most with entertainment. She kept her chin level, her hands steady at her sides, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "Behold," the king's voice boomed, across the vaulted ceiling, "our gift to Sir Gareth the Fallen." More laughter, sharper now. "A reward for his faithful service." Faithful service. The words dripped with mockery. Everyone knew what Sir Gareth had done, how he'd lost his lands, his title, his honor, how he now lived in the crumbling tower, at the kingdom's edge like a ghost, haunting his own life. Mira's eyes found him in the crowd. He stood apart from the other knights, his once fine armor tarnished, his cloak patched and worn. His face was stone, but she caught something in his eyes when they met hers. Not hunger, not cruelty, something that looked almost like recognition. "Take her," the king commanded with a wave of his jeweled hand. "She's yours to do with as you please. Perhaps she can scrub the shame from your walls." The nobles roared with delight. Lord Aldrich slapped his knee. Lady Margot whispered behind her fan to her companions, their eyes glittering with malicious joy. This was better than any feast entertainment they could have hoped for. But Sir Gareth didn't move. He stood there staring at Mira, and for a moment the great hall fell silent, except for the crackle of torches and the distant howl of wind through the castle's stone bones. "Well?" the king prompted, his voice edged with impatience. "Take your prize, Sir Knight." Finally, Gareth stepped forward. His boots echoed in the sudden quiet as he crossed the space between them. When he stopped before her, Mira could smell leather and steel and something else, something like rain on earth. "Come," he said quietly, his voice rough with disuse. Not a command, almost a question. Mira nodded once. She had no choice, but somehow his tone made it feel less like surrender and more like escape. As they turned to leave together, the laughter resumed behind them, following them out of the great hall and into the cold night air. But Mira found herself walking not behind Sir Gareth, as a servant should, but beside him. Neither spoke as they made their way toward the distant tower, but something had already begun between them in that moment of shared recognition. Something the laughing nobles couldn't see. The tower smelled of dampness and forgotten years. Mira stepped through the heavy wooden door and breathed in dust, cold stone, and something that might once have been hope. Gareth moved past her without a word, his shoulders rigid beneath his patched cloak. The main chamber stretched before them, larger than she'd expected, but emptier too. A few pieces of furniture huddled near the enormous fireplace like survivors of some long-ago battle. Tapestries hung in tatters on the walls, their colors faded to whispers of what they'd once been. "There's a room upstairs," Gareth said finally, his voice echoing off the stone. He didn't look at her as he spoke. "Small, but it has a window. You'll have privacy there." Mira turned to study his profile in the dim light filtering through narrow arrow slits. Privacy. Not what she'd expected from a man given a servant girl as a cruel joke. The nobles back at court would be disappointed to know their entertainment was being handled with such careful distance. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Down here, by the fire." She nodded, though he wasn't watching to see it. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the whistle of wind through cracks in the ancient mortar. This was harder than scrubbing floors or serving at table. At least those tasks had clear boundaries, known expectations. "Are you hungry?" The question surprised them both. Gareth's head turned toward her, eyebrows raised slightly. Yes," she admitted, For the first time since leaving the great hall, something like relief crossed his weathered features. Purpose. That was something he could understand. There's a kitchen of sorts, nothing fancy. He moved toward a doorway. She hadn't noticed, his limp more pronounced now that no one was watching except her. I'm not much of a cook, but there's bread, some cheese. Mira followed him into the smaller chamber, where a simple table held the promised food alongside a clay pitcher and 2 wooden cups. Everything was clean, she noticed, poor, but cared for. You don't have to serve me, Gareth said as she reached for the bread. His hand stopped just short of touching hers. I mean, you're not my... What am I then? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. He met her eyes for the first time since they'd left the castle. In the flickering candlelight, she could see the careful walls he'd built around himself, and behind them, something raw and unhealed. I don't know, he said quietly. But you're not a joke. Something loosened in her chest. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers against wood. Neither of them knew it yet, but winter was coming early this year. The sound woke her near midnight, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the tower's usual. Chorus of wind and settling stone. Mira sat up in her narrow bed, listening. Another sound, softer but strained, drifted up from the chamber below. She found him by the dying fire, sitting on the floor with his back against the stone hearth. His shirt lay in a crumpled heap beside him, and in the orange glow of the embers, she could see why he'd made that sound. The scar ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs, a twisted rope of flesh that looked angry even in the dim light. But it wasn't the old wound that made her breath catch. It was the fresh blood, seeping from where the scar had torn open again. You're bleeding, she said quietly. Gareth's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for the shirt to cover himself. I didn't mean to wake you. Go back to bed. When did this happen? It's nothing. An old wound that opens sometimes. When... He tried to stand and winced, the movement sending fresh blood trickling down his back. Mira was already moving toward the kitchen. Sit still. She returned with water, clean cloth torn from her own spare shift, and the small pot of healing salve she'd noticed among the kitchen supplies. Gareth watched her approach with the wary look of a wounded animal. I can manage, he said. I know you can. She knelt behind him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. But you don't have to. Her fingers traced the air just above the wound, not quite touching. This is from a sword, mace? His voice was tight. 3 years ago when I... He stopped. When you fell from grace, she asked gently. He nodded, the movement barely perceptible. Mira dipped the cloth in water and began cleaning the blood away with careful strokes. His muscles tensed under her touch at first, then gradually relaxed. I was a bastard too, she said suddenly. The words came out of nowhere, surprising them both. Born in the kitchens to a scullery maid who wouldn't name the father. Gareth turned, his head slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not the only one who doesn't belong anywhere. She pressed the salve gently into the torn skin, feeling him shiver under her touch. The other servants never let me forget what I was. Less than them, but more than nothing. And now I'm here. She wrapped clean cloth around his torso, her arms encircling him to reach the bandage ends. For a moment they stayed like that, her chest pressed against his back, breathing in sync. Thank you, he whispered. When she pulled away, something had shifted between them. The careful walls were still there, but now they both knew where the cracks were. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy with secrets yet to spill. The loose stone gave way under Mira's foot as she carried water up from the tower's base. She stumbled, her bucket clattering against what should have been solid wall, but the sound was wrong, hollow. Gareth, she called, running her fingers along the curved stone. There's something here. He appeared at her shoulder, his newly bandaged torso making him move more carefully than usual. Together they found the edges of what had once been a hidden door, its outline nearly invisible after years of neglect. "I've lived here 3 years," Gareth murmured, pressing his palm against the stone. "Never knew this was here." The door opened, with a grinding protest that echoed through the tower, like the voice of something long buried. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of old parchment and something else. Something important. Gareth lit a torch from the main fire, and they descended narrow stone steps carved directly into the living rock. The chamber below was small, circular, with walls lined in alcoves, but it wasn't empty. Scrolls filled every niche, some bound in leather, others tied with cord that crumbled at a touch. A single wooden table sat in the center, its surface covered with maps and texts that seemed to have been abandoned mid-study. "This belonged to the tower's previous lord," Gareth said, lifting a scroll with careful fingers. "Sir Aldwyn the Learned. They said he was mad, always reading, always writing about..." "About what?" Mira moved to the table where one book lay open, its pages covered in precise script. Prophecies. Gareth's voice was strange. Old stories, things that were supposed to happen but never did. Mira leaned over the open book, her finger tracing words she could barely read. Most servants never learned letters, but the kitchen master's wife had taught her the basics in exchange for extra help with inventory. "When the kingdom grows sick, with its own poison," she read slowly, "when the noble blood runs thin and corrupt, then shall come the bastard's child to cleanse the realm." The torch flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Born of the fallen and the forgotten," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Conceived in love where hatred dwelt, the child shall carry both crown and cross." Gareth set down his scroll. "Mira, the mother shall be scorned as worthless. The father cast from grace, yet from their union shall spring the future of the realm." Her hands were shaking now. "Look for the signs, the red moon, the dying king, the bastard who knows her worth." Silence filled the chamber like water in. Well, when is the next red moon?" Mira whispered. Gareth's face was pale in the torchlight. 3 months, maybe less." Above them the wind picked up, howling through the tower's stones like a warning. In the hidden chamber, surrounded by prophecies, written by a madman generations ago, they stared at each other and felt the weight of destiny settling on their shoulders like a cloak they'd never asked to wear. The bastard's child. The words echoed in the darkness between them. The village elder's cottage smelled of herbs and secrets. Mira sat across from the ancient woman, her hands trembling as she held the piece of faded ribbon she'd carried since childhood. The only thing her mother had left her before dying of fever when Mira was barely walking. "I need to know," Mira said quietly, "about my mother, about who my father was." Gareth stood by the door, silent but present. They'd ridden down from the tower at dawn, the prophecy burning in both their minds like an unhealed wound. Old Marta's fingers, gnarled as tree roots, reached for the ribbon. Her milky eyes studied the fabric, tracing the gold thread woven through. "The blue silk, I wondered when you'd come," she said finally. "Wondered if you'd ever need to know. Then you remember her, Lena the scullery maid." A bitter laugh escaped the elder's lips. "Scullery maid, is that what they told you?" She set the ribbon on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "Child, your mother was no servant." The world tilted. Mira felt Gareth step closer behind her. "Lady Lena of Northbrook," Marta continued. "Youngest daughter of a minor lord, sent to court when she was barely 16. Beautiful as spring water, they said. Too beautiful for her own good." "That's impossible," Mira whispered. "She worked in the kitchens. I grew up there. She worked thereafter." Marta's voice grew soft with old pain. "After the previous king tired of her, After she was with child and couldn't hide it anymore, after they stripped her of everything but her life. The cottage walls seemed to press closer. The previous king? King Edmund the Just, they called. Him? Marta's laugh held no humor, just enough to keep his bastards alive, not just enough to acknowledge them. Your mother served in his kitchens until she died, watching her daughter grow up as a servant in the castle where she should have been a princess. Mira's vision blurred. 20 years of scrubbing floors, of being less than nothing, of believing she deserved every cruel word and careless blow. The ribbon, she managed. Royal silk, Marta confirmed. The only thing they let her keep. She said one day it might matter. One day you might need proof of what you are. Gareth's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. Mira, she looked up at him, seeing understanding in his eyes, the bastard's child. The prophecy hadn't been speaking of some distant future. It had been waiting for her all along. King Edmund died 2 years ago, she said slowly. His brother took the throne. Yes, Marta nodded. And King Harold grows sicker by the day. No sons, no daughters. When he dies, the words hung unspoken in the herb-scented air. When he died, the crown would need an heir. Any heir. Even a bastard daughter born of a forgotten king and a woman who died in poverty. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The red moon was coming. The storm hit the tower like God's own fury, rattling shutters and sending rain through every crack in the ancient stones. Mira stood at the window watching lightning tear the sky apart, her mind still reeling from the elder's revelations. Royal blood. Her mother's silk ribbon lay on the table behind her, proof of everything she'd never been allowed to be. "You're shivering," Gareth said from the doorway. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not pity, not careful distance. Something deeper, warmer, tinged with the same desperate understanding that had been growing between them since that first night in the Great Hall. "Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie," she whispered. He crossed the room slowly, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. "Not everything." "What do you mean?" "You're still the woman who tended my wounds without being asked. Still the one who found courage in that throne room when they mocked us both." He stopped just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Your blood doesn't change who you are, Mira. It just explains why you've always carried yourself like someone who knew she deserved better." Lightning illuminated his face, throwing harsh shadows across the scar that ran along his jaw. Another mark of his fall from grace. Another wound that had never properly healed. "We're both broken things," she said softly. "Maybe that's why we fit." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had dared cross before. Outside, thunder rolled across the kingdom, shaking the very foundations of the tower. Mira reached up and traced the line of his scar with gentle fingers. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of wanting this. Of wanting you." Her voice was barely audible above the storm. "Of what it might mean." Gareth's hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. The prophecy spoke of love where hatred dwelt, of the fallen and forgotten finding each other. "And if it's true, if we're meant to, then we choose it," he said fiercely. "Not because some ancient text demands it, but because this," he gestured between them, "this is the first real thing either of us has ever had." When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of a drowning man finding shore. She melted against him, all the careful walls they'd built crumbling like sand in the tide. They moved together with a tenderness born of shared wounds, of understanding what it meant to be cast aside and forgotten. In the tower chamber, surrounded by storm and prophecy, they found in each other something worth saving. Later, as they lay entwined by the dying fire, neither spoke of the ancient words echoing in their minds, of red moons and bastard children. of kingdoms that needed saving, but somewhere in the darkness between sleeping and waking, destiny took root. The parchment crackled in King Harold's trembling hands, his fever-bright eyes scanning the spy's report for the third time. Around the council chamber, his advisors waited in tense silence, watching their dying king process information that could destroy them all. "The servant girl?" Harold wheezed, his voice barely carrying across the stone table. "The one we gave to the fallen knight. She's with child." Lord Chancellor Aldrich leaned forward, his calculating mind already working through implications. "Sire, surely a bastard's bastard poses no threat to—" "You fool!" The king's fist struck the table with surprising force. "Don't you understand what she is?" Confusion rippled through the assembled nobles. Sir Edmund the Younger, the king's cousin and presumed heir, shifted uncomfortably in his ornate chair. "Explain yourself, your majesty," Aldrich said carefully. Harold's laughter was bitter as winter wind. 22 years ago, my brother Edmund took a young noblewoman to his bed, Lady Lena of Northbrook. Beautiful, they said, too beautiful to resist. His eyes gleamed with feverish intensity. When she bore his bastard daughter, we thought the problem solved itself. The girl grew up a servant, forgotten, harmless. The silence in the chamber grew heavy as understanding dawned. "But now she carries a child," Harold continued, his voice growing stronger with rage. "A child with royal blood on both sides, my brother's bastard line united with whatever seed that disgraced knight might carry." Sir Edmund the Younger's face had gone pale. "Uncle, surely you don't believe in those old prophecies, the ravings of madmen, and—" "I believe in blood," Harold roared, then dissolved into a coughing fit that sprayed crimson across the parchment. When he recovered, his voice was deadly quiet. "I believe in threats to the crown, and I believe in eliminating them before they grow too large to control." Master of Whispers. Roderick, a thin man who lived in shadows, finally spoke. "What would you have us do, your majesty?" Harold's fever-glazed eyes swept the council chamber. "The Red Moon comes in 6 weeks. Every peasant in the kingdom has heard the prophecies. If they see a royal bastard with child at the prophesied time—" He didn't need to finish. They all understood how quickly whispers could become rebellions. "The fallen knight is skilled," Sir Edmund warned, "and the tower is defensible." "Then we don't attack the tower," Harold said with grim satisfaction. "We bring them to us. Send word that the girl's true parentage has been discovered. Tell them she's to be legitimized, given her rightful place at court." His smile was sharp as a blade. Few can resist the promise of everything they've ever wanted. Outside the council chamber, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the same kind of clouds that had covered the tower the night a bastard princess conceived the future of the realm. In the shadows, plans took shape like thunder. The king's messenger never made it to the tower. Gareth found his body at dawn, 3 arrows in his back and a sealed letter clutched in his dead fingers. The royal seal was intact, but the message it carried was no longer secret. "They're not coming to legitimize me," Mira said, her voice hollow as she read the deception. "They're coming to kill us." Gareth was already moving, checking his weapons, securing the tower's defenses. "How long do we have?" "Not long enough." She pressed her hand to her still flat belly, where new life grew like a flame in the darkness. "There!" She pointed toward the forest road. "Riders, 20 men in dark cloaks, moving with the practiced silence of those who killed for gold rather than honor." They surrounded the tower like wolves, circling wounded prey, cutting off every escape route. "The hidden chamber," Gareth said urgently. "You can—" "No!" Mira's voice was steel. "We face this together." The first arrow shattered the window where she'd been standing moments before. Gareth pulled her down as more followed, a deadly rain that spoke of professional killers who took no chances. "Stay low," he commanded, drawing his sword. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, hungry for blood after too many years of peace. They came through the door like a flood of violence. Gareth met the first with steel, his blade finding the gap in the man's armor with practiced precision. But there were too many, and his old wounds slowed him more than he'd admitted. Meera grabbed a burning log from the fire, swinging it like a club as an assassin lunged toward her. The flames caught his cloak, and he screamed, stumbling backward. Into his companions. "The stairs!" Gareth shouted, cutting down another attacker. Blood ran down his sword arm, where a blade had found its mark. "Get to higher ground!" They fought their way up the narrow stone steps, Gareth behind her, his sword-work deadly in the confined space. Each step cost them dearly, but it cost their attackers more. In the upper chamber, Meera barricaded the door, while Gareth caught his breath. His face was pale, too much blood lost too quickly. "The window," she said, looking out at the forest below. "We can reach the trees." "You can?" He leaned against the wall, his breathing labored. "I'll hold them here." "Like hell you will." She tore cloth from her dress, binding his wounds with fierce determination. "The prophecy spoke of both of us. Remember? Fallen and forgotten, together." Below, axes began biting into the wooden door. Then, "We jumped together," Gareth said, pulling her close. Outside the window, 30 feet of empty air stretched down to forest floor. Behind them, the door splintered. "Now," he whispered. They leaped into darkness, carrying the future of the realm between them. The monastery bells tolled vespers as Brother Marcus led them through corridors that smelled of incense and old secrets. Meera's legs trembled from 3 days of running through forest paths, Gareth's arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. "You'll be safe here," Marcus said quietly, his brown robes rustling against stone floors. "For now." The chamber, he showed them, was small but clean, with a narrow window that looked out over rolling hills. No armies in sight, no assassins lurking in shadows, just peace, fragile as spun glass. "Why are you helping us?" Meera asked as Marcus set down a tray of bread and weak wine. The monk's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Because I knew your mother." Gareth's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. "Explain." "Lady Lena came here once before you were born," Marcus said, settling onto a simple wooden stool. "Pregnant, terrified, begging sanctuary from a king who'd tired of her. We gave her what peace we could." Meera sank onto the narrow bed, her hand pressed to her belly. "She never told me. She made me promise to watch for you. Said one day you might need what she couldn't give, truth about who you really are." Marcus reached into his robes and withdrew a small leather pouch. "She left this." Inside were letters, still sealed, written in a careful feminine hand. Meera's fingers shook. As she broke the wax on the first one, "My dearest daughter," she read aloud, "if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to claim what was always yours by right." Gareth moved closer, reading over her shoulder as the letters revealed everything. Names of nobles who'd supported her mother, hidden allies who still remembered King Edmund's bastard daughter, evidence of the current king's deliberate poisoning of his own bloodline to prevent rivals. "There are more of us than you know," Marcus said softly. "Lords who grew sick of Harold's madness. Common folk who remember when kings served the realm. Instead of their own fear. A rebellion," Gareth said. "A restoration." Marcus's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "The red moon comes in a fortnight. If you're willing to step forward, to claim your birthright." Meera looked up from the letters, tears streaming down her face. "They'll try to kill us again." "Yes," Marcus admitted. "But this time, you won't face them alone." Outside, the evening wind carried the sound of horses on the road. Too many horses, moving too fast. Marcus was already moving toward the window, his face grim. "They've found us." In the distance, torches flickered like angry stars against the darkening sky. The king's men, relentless as death itself. "There's another way out," Marcus said urgently, "through the crypts, but we have to go now." Below them, the monastery bells began tolling again, not vespers this time. Warning, the red moon hung like a wound in the midnight sky when the pains began. Mira gripped Gareth's hand so hard she felt bones grinding, her body convulsing with forces older than prophecy, older than kingdoms. "It's too early," she gasped between waves of agony that threatened to tear her apart. "The child isn't ready." Brother Marcus moved between candles and shadows, his weathered hands steady despite the chaos outside. Through the chamber walls, they could hear steel clashing against stone as the monastery's defenders held the gates against the king's final assault. "The prophecy never said it would be easy," Marcus said quietly, pressing a damp cloth to her burning forehead. "Only that. It would happen under the red moon." Above them, the eclipse reached totality, bathing everything in crimson light that seemed to pulse with each contraction. Gareth's face was pale in the bloody glow, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can't," Mira whispered, exhaustion making her voice barely audible. "I can't do this." "You can." His voice was fierce, desperate. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." The door shuddered as something heavy struck it from outside. Shouts echoed through the corridors, growing closer. The defenders were being overwhelmed. "They're coming," Marcus said, not looking away from his work. "Whatever happens, the child must survive to see dawn." Another contraction ripped through, Mira like lightning, and suddenly everything changed. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with electricity that made their hair stand on end. The candle flames turned silver, then gold, then colors that had no names. "What's happening?" Gareth demanded. Marcus's eyes were wide with wonder and terror. "The old magic. The blood remembers what we've forgotten." Outside, the sounds of battle stopped. Complete silence fell over the monastery like a held breath. Then Mira screamed, and the child came into the world in a rush of blood and starlight. The baby's first cry shattered the unnatural quiet, a sound so pure and strong it seemed to ring through the very stones of the monastery. In that moment, every candle in the chamber blazed brighter than the sun. "A son," Marcus breathed, lifting the infant with trembling hands. "A prince born of the fallen and forgotten." Gareth leaned down to kiss Mira's sweat-soaked forehead, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect." But outside, the silence was breaking. New sounds rose in the distance, not the clash of weapons, but voices, hundreds of voices, maybe thousands, all moving toward the monastery. "The people," Marcus whispered, listening. "They've seen the signs. They're coming." Through the window, the red moon began its descent, but its light remained strong. And in that light, a bastard princess held her newborn son, the future king of a realm that didn't yet know it needed saving. The prophecy was complete. Now, the real work would begin. They came through the great hall doors like a force of nature. Mira carried her son against her chest, the infant prince wrapped in simple monastery cloth that shone like gold in the torchlight. Gareth walked beside her, his sword drawn but lowered, while Brother Marcus followed with the ancient texts that would change everything. The throne room fell silent as death. King Harold sat slumped on his golden seat, fever having claimed most of his strength during the night-long siege. His remaining courtiers huddled like frightened children, their fine clothes unable to hide the stench of their fear. "You dare return here?" Harold wheezed, but his voice carried no real authority. The failed assassination, the broken siege, the signs everyone had witnessed, all of it had drained him of power like blood from a wound. "I return to claim what was always mine," Mira said, her voice carrying clearly across the vaulted ceiling. The same voice that had once whispered thanks for scraps from the kitchen table now rang with royal authority. Sir Edmund the Younger stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "You're nothing but a servant's bastard. Whatever lies you've spread—" "Are they lies?" Brother Marcus interrupted, unrolling the first scroll. "These are the records of King Edmund's court. Your own uncle's seal confirms Lady Lena of Northbrook bore his child 22 years ago." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Some had suspected, but seeing the proof laid bare in royal ink changed everything. "Bastards have no claim," Lord Chancellor Aldrich protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Mira shifted her son to one arm and reached into her robes, withdrawing the blue silk ribbon with its golden thread. "This was my mother's, royal silk, gifted by a king to his beloved. She held it high for all to see. But that's not why I'm here." She stepped closer to the throne, close enough that Harold could see the fierce determination in her eyes, the same eyes his brother had possessed, the same stubborn will that had built their family's dynasty. "I'm here because this kingdom is dying under your fear," she continued, "because you've spent so long destroying threats that you've forgotten how to nurture hope." Her infant son stirred against her chest, and she lowered her voice to something more dangerous than shouting, because the prophecy was never about bloodlines or ancient rites. It was about choosing love over hatred, building instead of destroying. "You would see me deposed by a kitchen wench?" Harold snarled. "I would see you step aside for the good of the realm," Mira replied. "The red moon has passed. The signs have been fulfilled. Even your own guards stand with the people outside these walls." Through the tall windows, they could all hear it. Thousands of voices chanting her name, calling for change, demanding a future their children could inherit without shame. The crown sat heavy on Harold's fevered brow, but his grip on it was already slipping. The cathedral bells rang across the kingdom like promises finally kept. Mira stood at the altar where kings had been crowned for 300 years, her son sleeping peacefully in her arms, as the archbishop raised the ancient circlet that would make a bastard's bastard into a prince. They had called her worthless. Once, they had given her to a fallen knight as a joke, expecting her to disappear into the shadows of history like so many forgotten women before her. Instead, she had become the mother of the future. "By the grace of God and the will of the people," the archbishop intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed cathedral. "I crown Prince Edmund, true heir to the throne, son of Queen." "Mother Mira, first of her name!" The tiny crown settled on the infant's head like it had been waiting for him all along. The baby stirred but didn't wake, as if he understood the weight of destiny was nothing compared to the warmth of his mother's arms. Gareth stepped forward, magnificent in the armor that had been restored to its former glory. The man who had once lived in shame at the kingdom's edge now knelt before the woman he loved, accepting the ceremonial sword that made him Lord Protector of the realm. "Rise, my lord," Mira said softly, the same words spoken by queens for centuries, but they had never sounded quite like this before, never carried such history, such transformation. As he stood, their eyes met across the space where their old lives had ended and their new ones begun. The servant girl and the disgraced knight, united by love and crowned by prophecy. In the front pew, Brother Marcus wiped tears from his weathered cheeks, the ancient texts cradled in his lap like children he'd finally seen safely home. Around him, nobles who had once laughed at a bastard's humiliation now bowed their heads in genuine respect, but it was the common folk who filled Mira's heart. They packed every corner of the cathedral and spilled out into the streets beyond. Kitchen maids and stable boys, farmers and craftsmen, all the forgotten people who had finally found their voice in a queen who understood what it meant to be nothing and choose to become everything. "The realm has been broken," Mira said, her voice carrying clearly through the sacred space. "Poisoned by fear, weakened by hatred, ruled by those who forgot that a crown is not a treasure to be hoarded, but a burden to be borne for others." She looked down at her sleeping son, then back at the assembled crowd. "Today we begin again." Today, we choose love over fear, hope over hatred, building over destroying. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Today we prove that worth is not given by birth, but earned by choice. Outside, the sun broke through clouds that had covered the kingdom. For too long, filling the cathedral with golden light that touched bastard and noble alike, the future had finally begun.